my research and writing has gravitated from a primary focus on the United States to a more global focus in maybe the last decade. But it's been just the last couple of years, and I've done some projects.
똑같은 위치고 주차하시고 들고 올라가시면 될 것
and
같습니다.
a couple of other people, and now I'm dabbling in
문자로
Chinese
자세한
school.
내용
And
보내드리겠습니다.
I did co-author a paper with Dr. Boucher in the first issue of the new journal. By the way, I want to encourage anyone that might have some research looking for a place to publish that we do have. The Asian Journal of Sport History and Culture that evolved out of the International Journal of the History of Sport. And we have our own standalone journal now. We'll be publishing the second issue, second volume coming up. And so please, I'm on the editorial board, and if anyone has an interest in submitting something, please let me know. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can get people interested in that. I want to quickly run through, and I apologize about the one thing you're not supposed to do is put too many words up on the screen, but I violated that. I wanted just to identify the key points, and then I would like to also say a bit about my own personal journey into sports history. And I hope you don't think it's self-indulgent, that I just want to be, I'm reflecting upon not only the state of the fields, but I want to share with you how I got into sports history. So let's just look at this. So we have a surge of Asian sports studies, but I think it remains segregated from parts of the mainstream in the field, and somewhat disconnected with the discourse in Western-dominated sports studies. The absence of articles and books published by non-Western researchers, what we find, and I'll show you some quick slides. Most of the people that are publishing, in the top journals in history, sports history and sports sociology are Western-located scholars, and we'll discuss that a little bit. So I want to just reflect on some of the challenges beyond the language challenge, which is a major challenge. I have a great deal of admiration for scholars working in their second or third language, and I want to talk about the term of what I'm trying to, the style which I'm trying to evoke here of reflexivity, of being self-reflexive. Not just talking about the facts, doing the case study and tidying up the conclusions, but what is the purpose of what we're doing here? And what are the implications for the way in which we conceive of our fields? And then finally, to end the conversation for today anyway, and hopefully try to inspire people to pursue this, is a call for action to try to find a way of bridging that gap. And so let's, so my first point would be that I never intended to be a sports historian. I studied social history as a master's student. I went to the University of Maine to do my Ph.D. under the auspices of doing Canadian history. I was interested in doing labor and working class history, and I worked on that for about a year, and I decided to redirect my focus to American cultural history. I became interested in this period of the 1870s to 1920s, the heyday of popular nationalism throughout Europe. Rapid industrial and monopoly capitalist development in the United States, and it was fragmenting in many ways along class, gender, ethnic lines. But somehow, there was a glue that kind of held people together to identify themselves as Americans. And one of those, I would find out that, so I began researching broadly here. And these are just a sample. I was certainly situated in Marxism. And another key work with Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian political theorist and activist, who tried to talk about how societies stayed together through consent rather than coercion. The classic E.P. Thompson, Making of the English Working Class, Raymond Williams here, I lost my place. These are all, this top row, as well as Perry Anderson, were British Marxists who were trying to identify a different way of moving away from this sort of orthodox style to include culture. So these are the kind of works that I was reading before I had this interesting experience. I was assigned, I was halfway through my PhD, and I didn't really have a topic for the dissertation. And I was assigned to be William Baker's teaching assistant for his Sports in the Western World course. And I thought that was curious, interesting. But as we interacted, I remember one day, coming to his office being all, sort of unfocused about all this stuff that I'd been reading in culture and nationalism and so forth, trying to find a way to focus it all. And Baker just looked at me and said, "Why don't you just focus this through the lens of sport?" How had I not thought of that? But I had never thought of that. And he began to help me sketch out some preliminary chapters, and that was my great aha moment. In my third year, beginning my third year as a PhD student, that I switched over to sport, and I found that there was this sport provided this incredible access to engaging with some of these questions about nation, national identity, and so forth. So Baker, as some of you may or may not know, did an important survey of sports in the Western world. He wrote extensively. He was coming out. He came to. I know that I should probably slide off this. He also did not. He was a religious historian. And he got into sport late in his career after he got tenure, And there were other people that were important to the formation of modern sports history, like Alan Goodman, who came from literature and taught American literature and politics, and even someone like Tony Mangan, who was the same generation as Baker. So this is how I got sort of immersed in this. So I tried my hand at a very, very amateurish word cloud here of kind of some of the terms that existed kind of in my head before I got to sport. The new social history, agency, civil society, cultural hegemony, cultural Marxism, transnational history, post-structuralism. All of these concepts were some of the defining concepts for those of us that were coming into this. Professor Black over here and I are the same age, and we finished our dissertations about the same time. And he was also, and many of us were coming in. We were bringing this baggage or this background to the study of sports. So these are a couple of better professionally done word clouds, but these are also some of the terms up here were again the things that were rambling around in my head. Cultural studies, this group of leftist British scholars who tried to understand culture, the multifaceted nature of culture and power, and the European tradition of structuralism, sociology, So you could look through all of those, and that's so it was a broad range. I became particularly interested in historiography, and so I edited this book, The New American Sport History, and my point was, what are the connections between this relatively new field? Sport history dates really back to the early 70s. So, when I started, it was only 20 years old. And what was the connection? Most of the people that were coming into sports studies came from physical education, or kinesiology, as the Americans like to refer to themselves to sound more scientific. And then a handful of historians. So my introduction was, what is the connection? What are we doing in sports history, and how is it connected to the parent disciplines of history and sociology and so forth? And then some years later, 2009-10, I co-edited with John Norright the Routledge Companion to Sports History. This is a reference work that's now there's a new Routledge handbook, and I'll introduce that in a minute. What I said a year later in a guest introduction, in a guest special issue in the Journal of Sport History was, I opened the question, this is in 1998, what is the state of sport history? To what extent are those working in the Americas, the United Kingdom, Europe, Australasia, and elsewhere agree on methodological, theoretical, pedagogical issues? Okay, where do we agree, where do we disagree? It was an attempt at self-reflection, self-examination. The same was happening in the field of sports sociology in the 80s. If you look at the Sociology of Sport Journal, for instance, there were a number of articles that were trying to get at the different schools of thought, the contending kind of paradigms within the field, and so we have a long history of that. I would say that the big point, and I took too much time on it, the big point is that there is self-reflection, self-evaluation of what we're doing and how that relates to other parts within this subdiscipline. Okay, now, this is an abrupt transition. So I'm giving you a sneak preview of an article that's been accepted and is forthcoming in the journal, the Asian Journal of Sport History and Culture, by Dr. Boucher, who is at Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's French. He's a sociologist, very much a French sociologist, a Bordeaux sort of oriented scholar. And he's recently done a bibliometric scoping review of the 4 major sports sociology journals and the 4 major sport history journals. And he will do, the articles forthcoming. I just wanted to give you, so we have the titles. He looked at about 2,500 articles, okay, and there are the numbers. What we find here, if we look at the dark green there, that's the percentage of Asian scholars publishing in this journal, about 6%. It's a little bit better in the sport history journals, but that it has to do largely with the International Journal of History of Sport, with Fan Hong being the editor, has a very disproportionate number of articles that were published in that Asian sport history section of the journal. So what we have is that there's a very small percentage of Asian scholars that are being published in these journals, and we can have a discussion about this. Boucher will talk about this in more depth. So this is the question, what to do about this. This is also what he does in this article. He does some word clouds. So this journal here, the International Review of the Sociology of Sport, this is kind of what, in this decade, those were some of the key terms mentioned continuously. The Journal of Sport and Social Issues, and Sport in Society. So, you know, by looking at this, we don't have time to really look at it carefully, you can begin to get an idea of what the key terms and some of the key jargon and the key debates. In sport history, there is what I would say the new sport history, sport studies, is deconstruction. This is a term that comes out of European critical social theory, and the historical profession in sport history remains largely self-unaware. This is coming from Malcolm McLean. For the first several decades, sport history remained grounded in empirical orientation, you know, the who, what, when, where, you know, those kinds of basic gated questions. And running parallel to the discipline in remaining silent concerning ourselves. Sport history's recent enhanced reflexivity, and it's becoming the object of study. And since the mid-2000s, sport history has been becoming the object of its own study. Okay? So now the leading edge in this new Rutledge handbook is really about historians, not about the content so much as, let me just show you here as an example. Here's the latest reference work on the field of sport history. Now, just take quickly, part 1, beginning, history and representing the sporting past, writing macro history, cultural studies, narratives, sport and activism, the body, visuality, politics, material culture. Okay. None of these are maybe quite foreign markers for Asian scholars, but this is where the agendas of some of these journals are set, and I think that this is one of the reasons that Asian scholars, not that the Western work is necessarily better, it's different, and it comes from a different perspective, it comes from a different background. So I think that it would be worthwhile, my comment is that it's worthwhile going to the Rutledge Sport Studies empire in true British imperial form. Taylor and Francis and Rutledge has carved up and commercialized all of sports studies into nicely convenient handbooks. But those handbooks are very useful for people that are from outside the field or coming into the field. So Indigenous sports history, very popular in Canada, Australia, for instance. There's an entire section on journals that would be that does the history of these journals, emerging themes. So I know that my time is up. So I will say that I want to direct you to what I think is an outstanding historiographical article that was recently published in 2020 by Huang, Fan, and Zhang in the last issue of the International Journal of the History of Sport before the new journal. And it sets an agenda that really is incredibly thoughtful and helpful, and I think it's also a seminal historiographical contribution. The role of Asian sport remains underplayed within both the contemporary sports world and the Western-dominated sports studies. I'm quoting from them. But it's not just the Euro-American centrism or ethnocentrism, but perhaps the lack of ability of Asian languages by scholars from other regions of the world and the dominance of the English language as the official language of the most international sport history organizations and journals. Remapping the terrain for Asian sport history studies by pursuing construction of locality through recharting the research territories and how it should acquire globality. The conceptualization of an Asian sport history paradigm, a new Asian studies linked with sport, and more comparative study between Asian and Western sports, global and our transnational approaches which emphasize the interconnections between and among nation states rather than the mono-directional flow from the West or the internal organization of sports. So, I wanted just to put this out as something that's difficult to engage in 20 minutes. But where do we go in sports studies from here, both from within Asia and in the West, may depend on maybe a renewed or a new commitment to promote and connect together, to connect, work through this, and to promote the discipline. Sport history has been on the death throes for a long time, certainly in the West. Most of where sport history and sports sociology used to be is sports management now. A couple of my good friends in Australia at the time, in fact, held a conference that was sponsored by Sporting Traditions in 1997, entitled "The Death of Sport History?" ? That was 28 years ago. We were talking about whether or not sport history would survive because it maybe had less coherence and all this sort of thing, and that it was being marginalized within the academy. So these are questions that aren't going away. It's certainly, this part of the discipline is on the ropes in the US and the UK. It's on, I think, stronger footing in Asia. And I think that therein lies the opportunity to launch and promote a new style, robust style. There's so much, I think, potential in terms of not only research and publishing, but also in teaching and pedagogy. So the future is in our hands. I put this out there as maybe something to think about, and please let me know if any of you are interested in this type of literature or interested in pursuing something along these lines. That I do have to talk with you. So that's all I have for now, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I believe you talked a lot more than we discussed before it starts. And thank you for your innovative wearing, showing us how we can wear in an official meeting. It's just a joke. Okay. 그 두 번째 발표가 좀 그 내용이 굉장히 많은데 그 웨스턴 대체적으로 이제 웨스턴 그 시각과 이스턴 시각에 대한 어떤 조화가 필요하다. 그리고 그만큼 굉장히 많은 그 스터디들이 이 저널에 등장하지 않은 것을 보면은 앞으로 그런 시각들이 필요하지 않을까라고 사실은 결론을 지어주지는 않았고요. 그런 것들을 위해서 우리가 앞으로 어떻게 할 것인가에 관한 문제에 대해서 대체적으로 전달을 해주신 것 같습니다. 앞서 그 전반부에서는 이제 본인의 어떤 이 이야기들을 하기 위해서 본인의 어떤 그 퍼스널 히스토리에 대해서 좀 이야기를 하고 그 얘기를 해주셨던 것 같고요. 그 바로 이어서 we're gonna have a question from the audience, okay? 그 바로 뭐 질문이 있으시거나 아니면 코멘트가 있으시면은 해주시면은 같이 답변하는 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 네, 저기 한 분 계신데 혹시 마이크를 좀 부탁드리겠습니다. 아니면 질문 주실 때 소속하고 성함 좀 말씀해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Hello, this is Li from University of Seoul, and I have one question to Dr. Li. First of all, thank you for your interesting presentation. And I remember you mentioned digital gap as one of the potential risks, and it will increase inequity, and this includes income. And I want to ask you about your personal thoughts on how to overcome this potential limitation that people in low socioeconomic status could increase their physical activity levels while living in a digital technology-based community. Thank you.
자, 뭐라고 표현해야 되나요? 디지털 테크놀로지에 접근하기 어려운 분들에게 어떻게 할 것인가에 관한 질문이셨죠? 네.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part of your question. Could you please repeat?
She's talking about the digital
So,
gap.
Yeah,
말씀하세요.
You've mentioned digital gap as one of the potential limitations of the community-based technologies. And I want to ask you about your personal thoughts on the solutions for those people in low socioeconomic status who has a higher potential to experience those digital gaps.
Yeah, now I understand. So I have mentioned in my research, we should of higher awareness of the difference between different people's income, right? So all the smart sports community applications or device normally based on the digital cell phone. So there are many programs such as the mass media program we used in China, WeChat. So most of the applications are based on the WeChat official account or mini programs. That is to say, it is not like that we imagined the less salary, or how to say, the income lower people, they also have the smartphone. So in China, we